When the transit wheels grind to a stop in New York City, it's worldwide news. News. New York City.
FAQ.
It's FAQ.NYC. Christina Greer is back.
I'm back.
Welcome to the country.
Thank you.
Are you running for mayor?
Harry Siegel. Larry, I said no. I refuse to run for the mayoralty.
Join the rest of us in drafting Christina Greer. And joining us now, New York needs you. It's not for you, it's for us. Joining us now is Andy Newman of the New York Times, who's been on an incredible beat covering work for the paper over about the last 8 months. So he's worked himself as a food app delivery guy, and for a few hours as a mechanical Turk. We'll explain what that means if you don't know. And reported on home health aides, canners, and retail workers, producing a pretty incredible run of accounts you should go and read. And you can find all the links at FAQ.NYC about how work works now and sometimes doesn't, and how the modern world is changing it. Andy, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Harry.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Thank you.
So reading all these stories, one of the things that grabs me are how many workers in this new economy seem to only be getting paid for their productive hours. You know, I'm imagining shuddering if my bosses could do that. So if I stop to think or read a book or anything else, that's off the clock, and it's only the hours I'm actually writing or editing that I'm getting paid. And I saw that with the Mechanical Turks when people were talking about their hourly wages. With the when you were working for the delivery apps and biking around the city.
Yeah, and it's not just when you're pausing to read a book or something. These jobs, because they're piecework, you get paid when there's a job, and when there's not a job, you're sitting around waiting for a job, and you don't get paid. And if you're the worker and you've set aside your day to deliver meals for DoorDash or whatever, then that whole chunk of time is time that you think that you should be compensated for. But from the point of view of the company that's sending out the assignments, they only count the time when you're actually doing a job. So if you get a delivery and it takes 10 minutes and then you have to wait 20 minutes for the next delivery, you're thinking, what am I going to do with that 20 minutes? I'm sitting around and meaninglessly surfing on the phone or whatever. But the company says, oh, our delivery guys make $20 an hour because we're only counting the time when they're actually out running around and delivering things. And it's the same way with Mechanical Turk. The workers think about it in terms of like hourly wage, but the people who are creating the work are just saying, this is the task, this is how much you're going to get paid for it.
And when you say our delivery guys, as these companies are referring to them, I know when you were doing this, and I think most delivery guys are actually everyone's delivery guys, and they've got 5 or 6 apps up at a time, or 2 or 3, and they're looking at all the possible jobs and are actually working for everyone simultaneously in a sense.
Yeah, correct. And that's I think that's maybe more the case in New York, where there are several apps that are very much competing against each other. There's Grubhub/Seamless, and there's DoorDash, and there's Postmates. And the people who do the work find that if you are running all these apps at once, then your odds of getting delivery or getting a decent paying delivery are increased. But then you have this flow of decisions that you have to make, like, do I take this order, which is going to maybe take me over here, or I don't even know where it's going to take me. So it's
some of them tell you and some of them don't, right?
Some of them tell you and some of them don't.
Was insane.
And it changes from time to time. The apps kind of change the way that they run the game fairly frequently. So it's a lot to keep up with, and it was a lot more of an intellectual thing than I would have thought just being a delivery guy was. It's not
right. Well, and also because certain apps don't tell you, so once you click accept, that's when you find out whether or not you're going to go 45 blocks north or just 5 minutes away.
Correct.
But what I was fascinated with, Andy, is that, can you tell us a little bit more about the gender components? Because you interviewed both men and women, and some of the ages were surprising to me. They were slightly
with the delivery?
For the delivery people, they were slightly
I don't remember
older.
actually interviewing any.
I thought there was a woman. Courtney Melton?
Yes. Okay, that was one of the follow-up
Right.
stories. Yeah, I didn't talk to her. One of our
Okay.
other reporters talked to her. Sorry, I forgot about her.
It's,
I don't
I'm
know-
assuming it's primarily men.
Yeah, it's
but some of
primarily
the
men.
ages
I
were
have
surprising.
no idea what the breakdown is.
Uh-huh.
It's, I would say, it's got to be like more than 90% men, just because when you see people riding around the city with those cube-shaped backpacks on their back, how often do you see a woman riding
I
around?
worked for Postmates. I took a Postmates job between Vice and Gawker.
In the city,
In
or?
the city, yeah. And because I just like, oh, I'll do this. And also there was this other person I wanted to introduce to that kind of work, and a couple friends of mine. But I just did walking. And oddly enough, anecdotally, I don't know anything about the numbers either, but there was a lot of women who just took walking jobs. I don't want to ride a bike, and I was doing it for kind of like extra money while I was unemployed, and it was interesting. I could make up to $20 an hour, and they don't send you as far. So like a lot of the people that I was encountering were just like, yeah, I'll turn on the app, and this was about 3-4 years ago. So they would just turn on the app if they had nothing particular to do, and just kind of like walk and make a little extra money, like $10 to $20 an hour.
I mean, this is sort of the upside of the gig economy, right? You totally control your time. This is what all the companies say is like the great advantage of doing this work, is that if you do only feel like working, doing this job for half an hour or totally at your own convenience, you absolutely have the freedom to do that. It's just that if you're trying to rely on these things as a way to make a living, it's much trickier.
Well, because, one of the men you interviewed said, oh, I love it. I'm my own boss. He said, I have a boss, but I'm essentially my own boss,
Yeah.
which can be liberating for some because you can make your own hours. But it does seem like, can you talk to us a lot more about the tipping piece? I remember when it came out in the news and there were lots of people on Twitter saying, I'm going to stop using DoorDash. I was tipping, I thought I was tipping the guy who brought my food, and now I
Right.
realize I'm just tipping the company. And so the way you broke it down, I thought was really helpful for a lot of people who use these services and just did not realize their $3 was essentially going towards someone's base salary.
Right. So the tipping is a complicated thing. And after the story came out, DoorDash changed their, universally vilified tipping policy. There was a big catch, though, which is that the way the tipping policy was set up, a lot of the Dashers, which is what DoorDash delivery people are called, actually preferred it. And I will now try to explain this in less than 3 minutes, and cut me off. when
Our
I get there,
podcast
'cause
listeners
it's
love it.
complicated.
They're fine.
So the way, in the old DoorDash system, which DoorDash has now ditched, they would promise you, let's say, $5 to deliver a meal. And if you got tipped $3 in the app, DoorDash would pay $2 out of their own pocket, and they would simply grab the $3 that the person was trying to tip you and use that to get you up to $5. If the customer didn't tip at all, then DoorDash would give you the whole $5 out of their pocket. So from the point of view of DoorDash, they are using the customer's tips to subsidize the wages that they pay the delivery people. From the point of view of the customer, it's outrageous because you think you're giving $3 to the delivery guy, and really you're just going to underwrite this $7 billion company.
So how do Dashers feel about this, about losing the wage floor, but having tips coming directly to them, as I believe they've committed to now?
Right. So just to finish off how the old system worked, so one difference between DoorDash and other apps that I worked for, like Uber Eats and Postmates, was that delivery fee that they would promise the delivery guy was typically higher. So that same meal that DoorDash tells you you're going to get $5 for, Uber Eats would only pay you $2 for that. So if you're the delivery guy, you're thinking, oh, if I take the DoorDash order, I know I'm going to get $5 even if the customer doesn't tip at all. Whereas with the Uber Eats order, you get to keep the whole tip, but you're getting paid less of a base wage. So DoorDash described this process to their dashers as, here, we are going to insulate you against people who don't tip, and we're going to pay you more than the other guys, but we're going to keep the tips in most cases. So there were a lot of delivery people who liked that system because they didn't have to think before they took the order, well, am I going to get tipped or not? They knew they would get something. They also knew they probably weren't going to get much beyond that. But it eliminated a lot of the kind of variability, and it made their wages more stable. In my story, I didn't, at that point, totally get this. I did mention the fact that DoorDash typically paid me more as a base wage than the other guys. But after the story came out, customers flipped out, and they were like, I can't believe that, my money, I'm trying to tip this poor, struggling delivery guy, and I can't believe the money's not going to him or her. DoorDash had actually gotten a bunch of flack about that same thing 6 months before, when there was a whole thing about Instacart doing the exact same thing. And at the time, Instacart changed their policy, and DoorDash said, no, we're going to stick with this because our Dashers really like it. So after my story came out, there was another round of that whole blowback, and this time it was apparently so heated that DoorDash backed down and said, okay, we're going to change our policy. From now on, the customer's tip will definitely go directly to the Dasher, and we're going to change the base wage so that overall Dashers will make more money. And then over the next few weeks, they rolled out their new system. Their new system is in place. DoorDash says that the Dashers are making, on the average, more money than they did under the old system. They have hired like a third-party accounting firm to confirm this, and I think they adjust the wages so that they make sure that people are overall making more money. But undoubtedly, there are some people who are making less money, and who knows, really, because DoorDash is not particularly transparent, just like all these companies are not going to really let you see their whole complicated payroll and bottom line structure. So the DoorDash thing was sort of like an exercise in unintended consequences. I wrote about what seemed to me like a totally screwed up system. People got really mad about it. The company changed it, but meanwhile, the workers, some of them were like, I liked it the way it was. Other people were like, no, this is going to be a lot better for us. So I don't know yet whether workers at DoorDash are better off now that whole system has changed.
I think that's really important, just because there are these unintended consequences, and what your stories were essentially saying is that it's not carte blanche. I mean, there's certain drivers or certain riders who think it's a better system this way, and others, I'm sure, depending on how many deliveries they do,
and what kind of tips they get.
What kind of tips they get, probably what kinds of neighborhoods,
right.
Whether they're in
all that
corporate
stuff is very
versus,
variable.
Residential. I mean, all of that changes.
And then I'm curious how this relates to the restaurant business, which is its own weird can of worms, and you have the tipped minimum wage. Which
the DoorDash,
the same way.
It is the same structure. I don't know too much about the tipped wage, but I know that in New York, I believe the way the tipped wage, so what tipped wage means is that in New York, you're allowed to pay certain tipped workers less than the minimum wage, as long as they make it up in tips, and the amount that you're allowed to pay them that's less than the minimum wage is limited. Like, you can only pay them, I forget what it is, $2 or $5.
It's $2.85.
You can only pay them $2.85 an hour, or $2.85 less than the minimum wage.
I believe I'm confirming the tip minimum wage right now. Thank you, Internet. So it had been that. It's now with the rise in the minimum wage for everyone else to $15 an hour. It's $7.85 to $10, depending on where you are. So I'm sure in the city, everywhere, it's now $10.
Got it. So that means that the restaurant can basically only keep $5 an hour worth of your tips, and anything you get beyond that is yours.
And you have all these class action suits all the time where restaurants pool tips,
right?
Where they then take those pool tips and management takes a cut.
Correct. Yeah, there's a lot of abuses. There's a lot of abuses with the tip wage thing. But
Split
I mean,
base
what
wage.
DoorDash's model is definitely based on the restaurant tipped wage
And in
model.
an interesting way, both these involve not having
Bless you.
the apparent employer being the wage payer, right? Where the customer is making up some of the difference directly,
Correct.
and you're facilitating that. So we're recording at the space Alex Lynn has set up at 321 Canal with Don't Bury the Lead, that everyone should come and check out. And it's full of all these incredible old newspapers and other strange things I don't have the word gifts to describe to you, so you just got to come see. But I'm looking at the 9/11 papers, and there's the Post and the Daily News and Newsday, New York Newsday, and they're all tremendously fat papers. And that's an era where you have all of this competition, and it turned out to be, for a minute, really good for workers, for media workers at that point, and delivery guys and others. And then at a certain point, a lot of that competition goes away, and the tabloids are very thin and sad. And I'm wondering if something parallel might be happening around some of these apps, where Mechanical Turk is the go-to place. But if I go back to delivery for a minute, that each of them is hoping to be the last app standing, that the Dashers and others aren't going to be able to choose between 5 places. And at that point, suddenly the livings people make drop. The rules of engagement get more difficult. I think some of this happened with Uber as it pushed others out of the city when it was rising. Did you see any of that, or any concerns about that coming? Or are we
I
sort of
mean,
in a rush?
I can't forecast how these things work. I know that there are some cities, like I believe London and maybe Berlin, have like almost all the delivery work belongs to one app. And so in New York, delivery guys maybe don't complain so much, or don't organize, because if you're a DoorDash guy and DoorDash changes their pay model and you're not making as much money, you can go work for Postmates or Uber Eats or Seamless in places where there is one dominant app. Those workers have tended to organize more because they have fewer alternatives to, they can't just switch employers or whatever you want to call them when things get difficult. But I don't know. I mean, it is correct that a bunch of different apps all thought they were going to basically take over and monopolize the delivery business, and it hasn't happened yet. In New York, I think Seamless is like by far the biggest. It's like 75 or 80% or 70%. It's more than half. But in other parts of the country, it's different. It's very variable.
So I definitely want to talk about this Mechanical Turks piece, but before then, I mean, I have to have you discuss sort of the home health worker, just because that piece to me was so powerful, and especially because
Thank you.
many, not just New Yorkers, but so many people in this country are essentially dealing with this very issue. Essentially, you have a loved one who needs round-the-clock care. And especially if they have dementia or Alzheimer's, they definitely need someone who can not only stay with them, but is compassionate. But a lot of people haven't set aside a few $100,000 for this situation. So can you just walk us through that story really briefly? Just because I thought that there were so many racial and gender and immigration components that you put in the story, and you just kind of let them sort of sit there and just kind of marinate. Right, because of the gender dynamics of having a male patient or a client,
Right.
A female home health aid worker who's making a flat salary, which seems, $160 a day seems pretty impressive, until you said, well, actually, it's roughly $10 a day, if not less, because
hour,
she actually
yeah.
$10 an hour because she doesn't really get to sleep.
Right.
And she's an immigrant with her own family. So can you just tell us a bit more about that story? Just because I thought a lot of folks would resonate with it, whether they were on the client side or the provider side.
Right. So the reason I decided to try to write about home health aides is that there is this like exploding need for people to do this kind of work, and no one wants to go to a nursing home anymore. Everyone wants to age in place, and if you need help around the clock, people are living longer and longer, even with really bad, health problems. They're living longer and longer. So there's this ever-growing need for people to do this work, which you would think would pull wages up because there's this enormous demand for it. But there are all these reasons, a lot of them cultural, why there's kind of like a ceiling on how much people will pay for this stuff. So one of the so I learned in reporting the story that you know, by far, I mean, the work of home health aides is done almost entirely by women. Most of them in this country are women of color. A lot of them are immigrants, and the ones who are undocumented obviously have that kind of powerlessness that undocumented people have, which is that they feel like if they complain, they're going to get in trouble and have to leave the country. But in general, there's been such a long and kind of ugly tradition in this country of devaluing work that's done by women, and especially work that's done by women of color, that for whatever reason, the demand for this work is not pulling up the wages. And so you have these people who are doing this, just performing so many functions for their clients. They're like social workers, they're, you know, the chef, they're trying to be almost like a therapist too. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a very emotionally demanding job. It's also physically demanding. You're like, you know, having to turn or move around somebody who's
change diapers.
Yeah, and it's icky. You have to change the diaper of an adult, which is a pretty, you know, difficult thing to do unless you're really used to it and you kind of like that kind of thing. It's just extraordinarily difficult and demanding work. And I only interviewed maybe 3 or 4 home health aides, including the one who I shadowed, but all of them have this kind of sense of like mission and like almost like a calling to do this work, to like help someone who is on their way out of this life to really make their last years as easeful as possible. And it's just a phenomenally difficult job, and in a way it's much more important than like a lot of the work that doctors do around aged people, and yet they're making, you know, minimum wage or sometimes less. In New York, there is a law, it's called the 13-hour law, where even if you're a 24-hour aide, you only get paid for 13 hours because there is a standing assumption that you're going to get 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep and an hour off for lunch, an hour off for breakfast, an hour off for dinner, which sounds great, sort of. But in practice, if you have an Alzheimer's patient who awakens several times every night and you have to go deal with them every time they wake up, you're working more than 13 hours a day.
You mentioned in the story that some people have care plans that they actually have to be woken and turned every 2 hours.
Yes, correct.
Which makes this actually impossible for the
right.
math.
There's like a direct conflict between, you know, what the medical protocols are for caring for these people and what the wage laws are, at least in the state of New York. I don't know about it elsewhere.
And the courts dealt with this for a moment, and then it got undealt with. Is that right, with this 13-hour rule?
Yeah, I'm not 100% recalling what the court ruled, but the State Court of Appeals, the highest court, heard a case last year about this 13-hour rule, and they ended up ruling that yes, the 13-hour rule was okay, even though the common comparison is firefighters. A firefighter is paid for a 24-hour shift because they're on call for 24 hours, and they could have to go out to a fire any time of the day or night. But for whatever reason, the court sided with the state labor department,
which had created like an emergency order to keep it
an
going
emergency,
after a lower
yeah,
court
an emergency order that
it.
says this 13-hour rule is necessary. And again, this gets into a whole unintended consequences thing. The reason that the state, or one reason that the state labor department wanted this 13-hour rule to stay in place was that they said that if health aides had to get paid their same hourly wage 24 hours a day, it would basically, no one would be able to afford it. It would put the home health care agencies out of business. You know, many people who pay out of their own pocket for the care for their loved ones wouldn't be able to afford it. So again, it's a tricky thing.
Yeah, and
if it went if AIDS had to go up to 24 hours, it could be that there would be a lot less work.
So for our listeners, this article that stopped me in my tracks, it's called "On the Job: 24 Hours a Day, 27 Days a Month" by Andy Newman in the New York Times. It was first published September 2nd, 2019. Andy, the sentence that you referred to that really just took my breath away. It says, "It's a vicious circle. Because these have always been poor-paying jobs, they are seen as lousy, low-skill jobs. And because they're seen as lousy, low-skill jobs, they pay poorly." And so this cycle of, in some instances, for some workers, poverty for women who are doing this very difficult work, because the woman you shadowed said she's part psychologist, part maid, part family therapist, part everything, and she has her own family. Okay, so shifting gears. You've had a busy year, by the way, 2019.
It was a lot of fun.
So tell us a bit more about Mechanical Turks.
Mechanical Turk.
And this is from your November 15th piece in the Times. "I found work on an Amazon website. I made 97 cents an hour."
Okay, so first, what is Mechanical Turk? It's a historical reference. There was, in the 18th century, some guy came up with a magical chess-playing machine, and it was this, there was this like wooden Turkish guy in a turban and wearing, a robe, who was sitting at a chessboard, and it appeared that this machine could play chess. In real life, there was an actual human being buried like under the table that the chessboard sat on, and he was moving the pieces around. So a Mechanical Turk is a word for something that appears to be a machine but is actually powered by humans. Amazon called they created this labor site, and they called it Mechanical Turk because it was working exactly like that. Little tiny tasks that computers have not yet learned how to perform can be performed by humans to train the computers. Jeff Bezos called it artificial intelligence.
And is this essentially like the precursor for machines taking over, similarly to what the writer said in your last story?
Yeah,
essentially, we're doing the job before the computers figure out how to do it.
Right. Although some economists say that even once computers figure out how to do that job, it'll create other jobs for humans to do. So who knows? But anyway, there are several. There's a field called crowd work, where people who need little tiny digital tasks done put them up, post them online, and say, this task will take X minutes and will pay you this many cents per task. And Mechanical Turk is one of the oldest ones. It goes all the way back to 2005. It's run by Amazon, but the people who are actually paying you are not Amazon. They're just the creators of these tasks.
And give us an example of some tasks.
So there are tasks where like somebody who's developing an AI program wants you to tag a bunch of pictures to say, like, this is a dog and this is a cat, and it's teaching the computer to recognize stuff. There is a lot of work on Mechanical Turk by social science researchers who want to do surveys, and rather than go to the university students and say, hey, we'll pay you $10 to fill out the survey, they'll put it on Mechanical Turk and say, here's a survey, it'll take 10 minutes, we'll pay you 30 cents or whatever.
Even the New York Times, right, for a few big days.
Yes, the New York Times had a project called Project Fields. I found this a little bit creepy. I shouldn't say that about my employer, but
I'll say it. I found it creepy.
It was some software that the Times is developing so that it would match ads, pop-up ads, or the ads that appear when you're reading the story, with the emotions that the story would evoke in the readers. And this would allow the Times to say to its potential advertisers, you'll get this many more clicks because we're going to run your ad next to a story that creates emotions that makes people likely to buy your product. That may be a little bit oversimplifying it. But so when the Times was developing the software, they wanted the data. They wanted to know what kind of emotions people felt when they read a certain story. So they put a notice on Mechanical Turks saying, read a New York Times story and we'll pay you, I think it was 4 cents or 5 cents or I forget what it was, $1. It was some wage that was reasonably fair by the standards of Mechanical Turk. But it's used widely by many different people from many different disciplines, and a lot like these. There one common thing with these job stories that I did last year, the delivery story, the Mechanical Turk story, one that I did about people who collect bottles and cans, is that there are like tiers of workers where the people who are absolute beginners, which I was when I did these jobs, make absolutely crappy money, and the people who figure out how to do it and are really good actually can make okay money. So I did make 97 cents an hour doing these jobs because when you're a total beginner, all you have access to are the worst paying jobs, and if you do it for a while, you like get these extensions put on your computer that allow you to grab the higher paying jobs first. The more tasks you do, the higher your rating gets, and the more high paying tasks you're eligible for. So there are people who make $10 or $20 an hour doing Mechanical Turk stuff, and a lot of them were very upset that I made Mechanical Turk seem like this absolutely miserable paying job. But the statistics show that the average Mechanical Turk worker, including the total beginners like me who do it for a day or two and say, the hell with this, I can't make any money, is like $1.77 an hour, which in some countries is actually okay, and anybody on earth can do this work.
If
in
you
the
have
US,
a computer and an
much.
internet connection
Yeah.
and
But
certain things.
you say in the story it's mostly Americans actually here, about 70%.
It is mostly Americans, yeah.
So going back for a minute to Dashers, you had this great quote from this older guy, Andrew Iran, who's 49 and came from Nigeria and drives for all these places, Caviar and Grubhub and Uber Eats and Relay. And he said this job, I think Chris actually alluded to this before, this job is like working for nobody, he said. It's like having a boss but not having a boss. And then in the Mechanical Turk story, one of the things that really grabbed me was that Amazon is taking a cut from each of these things, but they're saying they're making the market, they're not actually the provider.
Correct.
They won't say if they actually use the service themselves, which it appears they do a lot. But the part of the reason people are making so little, most of them, until you really become a super pro, is that there are all these screwed up problems, that there's places that just automatically reject a bunch, have a 10% rejection rate, and then they just keep your work. Or there's no one to complain to, or you complain and nobody answers, and you're just like,
Right.
BS 729, where is my money? Or
Right.
you shorted me 60 cents.
Right, exactly. So yeah, on Mechanical Turk, there's a distinct lack of accountability. You have they're called requesters, the people who create the jobs, and you don't know it's not like it says you're working for the New York Times or whoever. It just, the requester will just have a name like Josh or RS-279, and so if you don't get paid, or if you spend a bunch of time doing the task and you do it and you get rejected, they can actually keep the work but reject you and not pay you also. There are a lot of tasks that are kind of poorly constructed so that you go through them and do them, and then you go to try to hit the submit thing and there's a problem. It's a messy, sloppy thing, and there's very little way to get the requesters to do anything about it. There's a little button that says contact requester, and you say, I believe that you shorted me 60 cents, which it takes up time. Every single second kind of
Right.
counts when you're trying to do as many of these little jobs as possible. So to what extent are you going to take 10 minutes to complain about 60 cents? But if they decide to just blow you off and not answer, like Amazon's terms of use say that all these determinations are between you and the requester, and the requester's word is final.
and that seems like quite a few people can get taken advantage of, just because I could do a task, or the machine could say, it wasn't done properly, we're not going to pay you.
Right.
But who's to say that it wasn't done properly.
Right.
Maybe
Well,
they're just taking my work and
Correct.
refusing to pay me.
So the one way that the Turkers, which is what people who do Mechanical Turk, can guard against this is that there are all these sites, like Turker-created sites for Turkers that review the different requesters and give somebody 5 stars if they pay immediately and they have a very high acceptance rate, and they'll give you a bad rating. They'll say this guy rejects arbitrarily or this guy didn't pay me. And so if you're smart, you'll look before you accept one of those tasks, you'll look and make sure that the requester is somebody who seems honorable.
Right.
So we're going to run out of time, I'm
Okay,
afraid. And
sorry.
No,
I
don't be
mean,
sorry.
it's like, Andy, you have a job. We want to keep you here all day.
I'd just love to know your what you've picked up on in the course of covering these over the last year, and any reflections on your own job and career, as I'm sure you've had, in the course of reporting and doing a little of this work.
I mean, I have always felt incredibly grateful to have the job that I do because I really love doing it, and the Times is a pretty amazing place to work. And certainly getting exposed to the myriad ways that people can get exploited in the new economy. I am ever more grateful that I have, a fairly secure job in journalism, which is, as you know, an increasingly rare and unusual thing. And God knows there are tons and tons of great journalists who are just scrambling their asses off to just try to make a living. And, I feel grateful that I have a full-time job.
Well, thank you, Andy. Thank you for your reporting. I was reading some of your stories while I was on the train going to and from my tenure track job, and I definitely just had a moment of reflection, just because I think you really wrote these pieces in a way that respects the work, but
I
also
tried to honor the people.
Yeah, but highlighting how it's very difficult work, and this country has always had a way of sort of setting it up such that really difficult work just is not honored or respected in a lot of ways. So I really hope our listeners will check out the stories Andy Newman for the New York Times, and that's Newman, and a series on DoorDashers and Mechanical Turks, and obviously the pieces that I resonated with the home health aid workers. So we really appreciate you coming on.
News.
News.
New York City.
FAQ.